Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome back. I'm very pleased to introduce our first guest. You may have heard just before the show started, we were listening to Maher Zain's Ya Rasool Salamu Alayka. And so our first guest is Ambassador Ebrahim Rasool, former South African ambassador to the United States. And so with that, I say, Ya Ambassador Rasool Salamu Alaikum. How are you?
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Abdullah, to you and to all your listeners. Alhamdulillah, in Ramadan, in Cape Town, we have hot, long days, but Allah is testing us. Inshallah, Allah will reward us even better for our fasting.
Inshallah, I mean, and in Joburg here, we're having some really bizarrely cold days that I hope inshallah soon we'll go back to the warm. But it's lovely to have you. Thank you for joining us this morning.
No problem. My pleasure.
So I came across this article, or rather I was sent it, that you had penned in Al-Qalam, titled Warren Goldstein, Chief Rabbi or Chief Representative. And of course, I read it with a lot of great interest. And so I guess the first question kind of asks itself in a really obvious way. So who is Chief Rabbi Warren Goldstein? Can you tell us a little bit about his background?
No, I know. He became the youngest chief rabbi that South Africa certainly has had at the age of 32. And he has been in that office for many years now. And the chief rabbi is the equivalent of, and I think they'll reject it, but the archbishop of the Catholics or the archbishop of the Anglicans. He would be the equivalent chief rabbi, religious leader, spiritual guide of the Jewish community. And so that's who he is. I think that I've worked with some of his predecessors like Cyril Harris. And while during apartheid, the mainstream Jewish community were on the wrong side of the apartheid situation, Chief Rabbi Cyril Harris, through the transition, played a fairly contrite and constructive role in the way in which we understood that transition and entering into the new democracy. However, watching over many years Chief Rabbi Warren Goldstein, I think, and that's what the headline of my Al-Qalam article is about, I think he's conflicted about what his main role is. I think, is he the spiritual, moral, religious, ethical guide for the Jewish community? Or is he simply the chief representative of Zionism and its colonial project, Israel? Because when you are conflicted like that, your moral clarity and your moral courage diminishes, and your apologia for an atrocity, a political project guilty of genocide, I think that begins to take far more center stage. And that's the chief conundrum about Warren Goldstein that I was trying to unravel in this article. Is he indeed the chief rabbi, or is he simply the chief representative of the state of Israel?
Sure, thank you. And so in the article, I mean, you open with the story of Ariel Seidman, Israel's chargé d'affaires, being declared persona non grata here in South Africa, which you say, and I'm quoting you here, it has elicited yet another extraordinary diatribe from Warren Goldstein, the chief rabbi of South Africa, in early February. And so can you tell us about, his reaction to this situation and touch upon the key things that he mentioned during that?
Well, look, I think that he basically, as a nod to his religious role, he, for example, quotes from Genesis, and those who curse will be cursed. And he uses it narrowly for cursing Israel, whereas the original usage of it is those who curse Abraham and the religion and the streams that come from the prophet Abraham. But he now uses it and basically says that our president is cursed, South Africa's government is cursed, the ANC is cursed, and we are cursing the people of the Eastern Cape who would have benefited from Israel's intervention. And so it was an extraordinary approach for a chief rabbi to take on the role of the divine in projecting curses onto people on the basis that Israel's chargé d'affaires, Ariel Seidman, had been declared persona non grata. And in that way, having been declared persona non grata myself, he, for example, would say that his hero, Donald Trump, would be okay with issuing a persona non grata declaration to me, but understands the law very well here that persona non grata is for an extraordinary misdemeanor like espionage, and says this Adel Seidman did not do that, and therefore the fact that he is declared persona non grata by South Africa means that now South Africa is cursed, the president is cursed, and so forth. And for me, that is not the language of a chief rabbi. That is the outrage expressed by a chief representative who feels that there has been a setback, that there's been a pushback against the Zionist project in South Africa, because South Africa dared to expel the chargé d'affaires Adel Seidman from South Africa.
Absolutely. And I mean, you mentioned that you were also declared persona non grata, of course, in the United States. And actually, yesterday, our opening story on this show was about the new American ambassador here in South Africa, Leo Brent Bozell III. And we were kind of talking as well about the fact that there is a bit of a double standard, or not a bit, a lot of a double standard applied to the way in which the U.S. kind of made the decision to assign him to South Africa, and the way that they treated you, of course. And it seems that double standard is persisting as well, with how they're kind of talking about this situation of declaring the chargé d'affaires as persona non grata. But coming back to sorry, were you gonna
I'm
say
just
something?
saying that you're absolutely correct. And the key word that I want to interrupt you with is not that they make unconscious mistakes. Particularly the United States and Israel as a Zionist project reserve for themselves what they call exceptionalism. All laws apply to everyone, but not to them. Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon, but Israel can have one because they are exceptional. The US does not have to be part of the non-proliferation treaty, but everyone else must succumb to those laws, including Iran. And so I think the key word that they reserve for themselves is this notion of exceptionalism.
Absolutely. But coming back to the chief rabbi, I mean, I must admit, I'm quite new to South Africa, and I lived previously in the United Kingdom, and I'm very familiar with kind of the context of things in the global north to a large degree. And I've grown very suspicious in those places of the way that interfaith dialogue works, because it often comes across as this attempt to like mainstream Zionism effectively, rather than to contribute to some sort of outcome of religious tolerance or coexistence, or all of these things that we want, of course, but not at the expense of compromising people who are suffering under the Zionist project. And so ironically, this is something that did actually exist, I must say, like in Palestine, where I'm from, pretty much up until we had the Zionist project kind of come in. And so I wonder, like, how does this fit in, with Israel's attempts to kind of lobby through using religious leaders in other places as well? Because, this doesn't strike me as something very unique to South Africa.
You see, interfaith dialogue by itself is not a problem. We've had interfaith dialogue in the darkest days of apartheid, when the common glue for different religious communities would be justice. And so, for example, in the anti-apartheid struggle, we did have Jews in, but they would be regarded today as secular Jews, and the chief rabbi may even call some of them who were in the anti-apartheid struggle and who now stand against the Zionist project, they probably call them self-hating Jews for saying, not in my name. But you see, affiliated to the UDF and affiliated to the interfaith movement at that point were groups like Jews for Justice and Jews for Social Justice. And that was the nature of it. It was not simply a comparative religious interfaith experience. It was a cooperative one. one in which we cooperated for good, for justice, for a democratic outcome in South Africa. And therefore, I think that what you are seeing today is a return to the comparative days in which we all had a kumbaya moment and we all were able to say, this is what we are, this is who you are, let's work together, etc. But the elephants in the room are so many that we don't get to the issue of what is the common good, what is justice, what is truth in a world of genocide. And so I think that you may have something that we must be very conscious of why we engage in interfaith dialogue. It is not to whitewash another sin, but in the case of Jews, we need interfaith dialogue with Jews until they act perniciously like Zionists, because we, in the same way that we had white people in our struggle because we taught ourselves not to hate white people, but to hate the system of white supremacy. In the same way, we must respect Judaism as a religion that may have been hijacked by Zionism, but we must still respect religion, and we must have empathy for Jews who were the victims of atrocities in Europe perpetrated by West Europeans. And so it's a very fine line we need to negotiate and navigate, and we can't let our anger determine it, but we can't also be blind to the moral injustice that we could sometimes be sucked into.
Yeah, indeed, actually, and and I mean, I must admit, like, as somebody who, my family were expelled from Palestine by Zionist settlers, I myself also feel quite, sorry for people who consider themselves to be, very religious Jews who don't make an argument for Zionism. And a lot of people have kind of spoken about this. UJ's own Stephen Friedman, recently published a book a couple of years ago, Good Jew, Bad Jew, where he spoke about, the way in which this process has taken place. The great professor Uri Davis as well, kind of touched on this many years ago. You have many people who kind of talk about it in a lot of detail about the way in which, trying to make a nationalist project out of Judaism at the same time compromise the very principles, the very just principles actually of Judaism, which are I think a historic tradition, of consistently standing for justice. And so thank you very much for that. And I'll ask you very quickly, will you remain with us until after the break? I think we have still very much more to discuss on this.
Inshallah, that would be good.
Inshallah. Thank you. All right, we'll go to a quick ad break and we will be back with Ambassador Ebrahim Rasool to discuss this in more detail. Thank you, listeners.
For the first time, I can dream again.
The Africa This is Salam Media, keeping you company this Ramadan.
Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for staying with us during the break, and thank you, of course, to Ambassador Ebrahim Rasool as well for staying with us. I'm going to quote now from your article, where you say, quoting you here, balancing his personae, he, Chief Rabbi Warren Goldstein, froths moral outrage at how the expulsion of the diplomat has now cursed the children of the Eastern Cape to a life of deprivation of potable water and sanitation, when Israel is the global leader in water management, to a life of compromised healthcare as a consequence, and endangered the country's relationship with President Trump and the USA, who will visit economic doom upon us. And of course, this is a reference to what the Eastern Cape Premier Lubabalo Oscar Mabuyane condemned as unauthorized engagements, to use his language, with the Israeli embassy. It's almost churlish of me to ask this question, but does the access of the residents of the Eastern Cape to clean water, sanitation, and healthcare really, really hinge on these sorts of backroom deals with Israel?
I don't think so. I think that South Africa, being a developing nation, has enormous challenges, and some of those challenges, let's be fair, have been exacerbated by mismanagement and sometimes corruption. And so we do not have to make an excuse about that, because what it has done is that it has opened the gap for a country like Israel to create a diplomatic push into South Africa, find an Achilles heel in the Xhosa King, and exploit the difficulties that residents of the Eastern Cape are having. I think that such an infringement is indeed an impingement on the sovereignty of South Africa. It's a diplomatic faux pas, and most importantly, it is an attempt to mask the genocide that is going on by saying, look how good we are in Israel, we can help your children, but you're killing children in Gaza. Look how we can help your sick people, but you're destroying hospitals in Gaza. Look how we can give you water, but you are diverting water, Palestinian water, away from Palestine to your settlements and to your desert. And so, in a sense, that's the moral dilemma that I think we need to look at. And that precisely is where the chief rabbi becomes the chief representative, when he defends what is going wrong on all of those exact same fronts in Israel, in Palestine, and tries to create a moral mask here in South Africa as an attempt to undercut South Africa's charges of genocide against Israel in the International Court of Justice. You see, the intention is to have a one-upmanship, not to help the children and the people of the Eastern Cape. It's a diplomatic masking that is taking place, not a moral humanitarian assistance to the people of the Eastern Cape.
Absolutely. And I mean, you do mention this in the article as well, which is something really important to bring up, which is that, you know, Israel's reputation as a leader in water management and sanitation is largely built on the fact that they've diverted water away from Palestinian aquifers and away from Palestinians towards Israeli settlers. So last month, Al Jazeera published a report in which they interviewed Jad Ishaq, the director of the Applied Research Institute in Jerusalem, which is a really important sort of institute that does a lot of research into the natural resources and ecological situation in Palestine. And in it, he says that, and I'm quoting him, the Israeli settler consumes approximately 7 times the amount of water that a Palestinian citizen gets. And he continues to say that the Palestinian individual's share does not exceed 80 liters per day, noting that in some marginalized communities, this can drop even to below 15 liters, which is way below what's the average recommended amount that a person should have, which is about 100 liters per day. And so, I mean, I think, this PR strategy of selling technical expertise as diplomacy while also depriving an indigenous population reminds me of another regime that once did this. And I believe that regime was called South Africa during the days of apartheid. And so, what can you tell us more about that?
So So basically, I think that we all have a very contemporary sense of electricity outages and water shortages, because we all have the right to those commodities right now. And we, for example, forget that when we needed when we democratized South Africa in 94, we needed to make very hard choices about whether we expand the electricity grid or whether we maintain the electricity sources of generation. And we neglected the maintenance and expanded the grid to cover almost all South Africans, whereas what we could have done is to do the maintenance, but say to South Africans, don't expect electricity quite soon, because it was a trade-off. The same thing with water. Suddenly, from reserving water for 5 million South Africans and their farms, we now shared it with 50 million South Africans, but the water sources remained finite as it always was. And so that explains some of the objective reasons why we have what we have today. But it is precisely the same apartheid project, that you divert all the water to your farms, you divert all the water to your towns and your cities and to your mines and so forth. And a family in the rural area needs to have one child not go to school because that is the designated water fetcher that walks kilometers to a river to supply the families water for the day. So that's exactly what Israel has been doing. In its case, it was more sophisticated. It has a network of tunnels and channels and canals from, for example, the Sea of Galilee. Before the water runs through the aquifers of the mountains of the West Bank, they are diverted. The aquifers are diverted so that even the Negev desert is flush with water. And so, in a sense, they understand the importance of water, and that's why they have used the bombing in Gaza of water retainers, water sources, to depopulate the parts of Gaza that they wanted depopulated of Palestinians. They understand the power of water, and so when they offer that service to South Africa, we should be saying to them, we need it, but thank you very much. We will do it in our way. You make sure that you have water justice in a place like Palestine, and give back. I mean, just an example I quoted, in Jerusalem, they've just cleared the Palestinian lands so that new settlements could be built there. But they also deprived the Palestinians of their wells and their springs, and taken that water away from those villages that used to live off that water and grew products off that water. And so it's all of this that has made the UN experts say that Israel is using thirst as a weapon of war to kill Palestinians. And they're using thirst in the Eastern Cape as a way to cover the genocide in Palestine.
Excellent. And I mean, I think there's also, a point as well about the fact that, economic justice in a lot of places contributes as well to a just outcome in Palestine as well, which involves, for example, like doing serious work to address these kind of issues. We have a few comments that have come in through the Facebook. From Abdul Razzaq Ismailov says, allowing an enemy state such as the apartheid colony to have leverage in South African municipal water infrastructure in any capacity is immeasurably foolish and endangers sovereignty and national security. Would you agree with that?
No, I think it's a self-evident truth.
And he continues to say people in positions of power need to be forced to adequately fix the country's shortcomings. There's no shame in asking a non-malicious actor such as China for guidance.
I think that is absolutely critical. that we need to get it right. I think it may take the same trajectory as it took to get the energy supply right and distribution right in South Africa. I think we are now dedicating money to water infrastructure. We need to understand that we are a water country, that we are subjected to climate change, and we need to make the necessary adaptations in order to deal with those problems.
And finally, Abdul Razak actually mentioned something that I did want to come back to, which is Abdul Razak says Ambassador Bozal probably won't need to unpack his luggage, since he will probably also be declared persona non grata in due time for something like saying a racial slur on the telly. I mean, I don't know, about Ambassador Bozal's background enough to be able to make a prediction like that. But I did want to ask you, what does, naming him as the ambassador to South Africa mean? We already mentioned, of course, that this is an example of American exceptionalism, but at a more fundamental level, what is going on here?
Look, there are two sides on that equation, and the art of algebra is to balance equations. So the one side is that Ambassador Bozal has been a long time enemy of liberation in South Africa and the black government that emerged after 1994. I think he was not just someone who agreed with the designation of the ANC and Nelson Mandela as terrorists. He was the one that propagated it, actively supported it, and so forth. And you can give him the benefit of the doubt and saying that many Americans held that view, but after 94, when they encountered Nelson Mandela, they changed. In Bozal's case, when he was being interviewed by Senate for the job, he kind of doubled down on all his prejudices on South Africa. He made it clear he is coming here to implement President Trump's vision of what South Africa is. He was here to tell us that black economic empowerment is racist. He was here to tell us that there's a white genocide. He was here to tell us to stop land reform in South Africa. He was here to ensure that we withdraw our case against Israel in the International Court of Justice. And so in a very real way, he has doubled down on all of that. So that's the one side of the equation. He told us before the time who he is and why he's coming here. The other side of the equation is probably that South Africa is balancing its response to the US between, on the one hand, taking out insurance policies, a policy of contingency in which we are diversifying our markets, not putting all our eggs in the US economic basket. So we're trying to do that with BRICS, with the Global South, with the African Union, etc., and with a remarkable degree of success. But I think that there is still a very strong hand of appeasement, of trying to say, listen, let's see how far we can make sure that Trump becomes less harmful. Okay, so let's not interfere with his choice of ambassador. That may prove to be right, or that may prove to be wrong. But at the end of the day, all the punishment that the USA could have done to us, they've already done to us. And the only reason that they are still considering whether the African Growth and Opportunities Act should include South Africa is because we have made it clear to them that you will hurt black workers on the farms, in the mines, and in the factories, but you will mostly hurt the white owners of the farms, the mines, and the factories. And that's the only reason why they are rethinking whether South Africa should be in AGOA or not.
There is honestly so much more to discuss on this matter, but thank you so much for joining us, Your Excellency. That was Ambassador Ebrahim Rasool. Jazakallah khair.
Shukran afwan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Please stay with us, listeners. After the break, we'll be discussing the developing situation in the Democratic Republic of Congo after this short break.
It's a wonder